All right, welcome back to the Young Lions Jazz Master Virtual Sessions. My name is Steve Weinberger. I'm the CEO of the Clearwater Jazz Holiday Foundation, and we're happy to have you joining us today. We've got our good friend, Dr. Pete Carney, with us today. Pete, how you doing?
Good. How you doing? It's good to be back.
We are excellent. Pete's been a regular with Clearwater Jazz Holiday Education and Outreach. He's done a number of different sessions. We record these sessions for the purposes of Clearwater Jazz Holiday Education and Outreach. Participants are muted when they enter the sessions, but if you have questions, please don't hesitate to use the chat feature or the raise your hand feature, and we'll get those questions to Pete. And if you're new to these sessions, after they occur, all of the videos are archived on our website at clearwaterjazz.com in the education and outreach section. There's a really cool resource called The Studio, which is brought to you by Blue Water Wealth Management Group at Steward Partners, and that archives all the videos organized by instrument. And if you enjoy listening rather than watching, we have the Young Lions Jazz Master Virtual Sessions podcast, and that records all the audio of all of these sessions, as well as some other programs that we have, like the Stop Time series with Frank Williams, which is a history-based program, really cool. And so if you have any feedback for us about this session or sessions you'd like to see, please don't hesitate to email that to info@clearwaterjazz.com. Let me tell you a little bit about Pete, and then we're going to turn it over to him for his topic today, acid jazz and Chillhop music production techniques. Dr. Carney is the Director of Jazz Studies at State College of Florida in Bradenton. Recently, his big band students took 8 out of 20 chairs in the all-state band for state colleges in Florida. In the last 2 years, 2 of his students have won first place in the statewide FCSSA Jazz Improvisation Scholarship Competition. He has previously given lectures on Radiohead and jazz at the National Jazz Conference and given a TED Talk on designing curiosity in music education. His music textbook, Interactive Listening, was chosen by Apple as the editor's choice. He has headlined as a saxophonist at jazz festivals, including the Rochester Jazz Festival, the Aberdeen Festival in Scotland with his acid jazz group Orange Alert. He plays around town. He plays around the Clearwater Jazz Holiday events. He just plays. And we love hanging with Dr. Pete Carney. Pete, welcome back to Clearwater Jazz Holidays, Young Lions Jazz Master Virtual Sessions. The stage is all yours.
All right. Thanks for having me again. I love these workshops. It's a great way for us to create education that's more than one time. You get to come back, and if you want to check it out later, there's just a ton of stuff on the website to check out. So I think it's very exciting where this is headed. I wanted to do something different than the previous workshops. Today, I wanted to talk about this new phenomenon called Chillhop. It's a neat style of music that's only been around a couple years. And it teaches us a lot about connecting jazz to audiences and to regular people. It has a lot to do with sort of stuff I created before in my life. It was then called acid jazz, I guess, or it had other names too. But it's a style of basically blending elements of jazz with contemporary grooves like hip hop or funk or soul music, and finding these sort of common threads and creating something new out of it. The other thing that's interesting about this music is that it really appeals to young people. And old people. It appeals to everybody because it's fresh. It uses the old language of music. But I think what's neat about it is that it uses it in a new way. It's very accessible to people that might not like hardcore jazz. And I play hardcore jazz all the time. I love playing giant steps and hard stuff like that. But I also know that for some people, it's you need something else to get you there to understand the more complex stuff. If you just jump into John Coltrane, it can be a deep dive into a music world that's hard to understand, and it's very advanced. Well, Chillhop is a great sort of bridge, and it's in some ways it's very simple, but in other ways it's very complex and very inventive in the way that they use rhythms. It's also very interesting. Their business skills are fantastic. Like it really represents like the home music producer and a lot of young kids or older kids, but finding ways to be creative and get your music out there and sort of be part of this Chillhop network. It's global, and I don't think any of the artists are necessarily making a fortune off of it, but they are being successful. You know, they're not, they may not make a ton of money off their first track with Chillhop, but they might enjoy their life, you know, like, and they have a successful musical life, even if they're just producers at home and they're making music that's very inventive. Let's check it out. All right. So again, what is Chillhop? That's kind of what we're talking about today. It's really interesting business model that affects how you should think about yourself as a musician. You're not, if you play an instrument, you're not just a player. You can also be a producer. You know, if you're a producer, you're not just a producer. You should also think about, how am I going to create an atmosphere around my music or a life that people want to be a part of? It's not just music. Like, the beauty of this sort of Chillhop culture is that it's sort of about escapism. It's sort of about animation. It's sort of about hip hop. It's sort of about jazz. And it's just kind of other world of interesting beats and interesting melodies. In the same way that Mozart's music was very simple. It was very refined, and I think Chillhop has that same characteristic. Mozart could play all the fast notes, and he could play all the fast runs and everything, but a lot of times his greatest music was much simpler than his peers. And that turned out to be like seeing simplicity as refinement of your skills, rather than seeing simplicity as something like we think of the typical definition of simple, right? So here, let's start with this little picture. This is the raccoon that you often see in these, and we'll see in these Chillhop videos. And like I said before, it's not just music, it's kind of this life. And so I started becoming interested because I would turn on YouTube and I would listen to jazz, and then this stuff would kind of drift into my playlist. I was like, what is this? Like, and it's also called jazz hop or other like acid jazz and all that stuff. And then I started seeing this raccoon pop up, and then he keeps popping up on these videos, and it starts to brand the product, and you start to become aware that this raccoon, okay, I've seen him more and more, and you look at the likes or the views, and this little raccoon is getting 5 million views here. I'm saying, what's going on here? You know, this guy whoever's putting this together, this sort of business enterprise is very successful at his branding and his atmosphere and drawing people in to something that lets them relax and still listen to jazz. So what's clever is this raccoon's kind of like your main character. You'll see him in a lot of the videos kind of walking around, or he'll like be hiding behind a tree or something. And it's like just enough to kind of keep you interested in a funny way. All right, let's look at the main components, like from a music producer's standpoint. How do you, like, what is it about this music that to put it together? It uses fragments of jazz, like it uses like little clips of music. Can you guys hear that? So I'm sure you probably did. Okay, so you'll have like these, instead of like in jazz, typically we might have like a complex melody. Our keyboard's kind of freaking out a little bit here. It was playing fine a second ago. but Chillhop will kind of refine that into something simple. Sorry, it's kind of glitching in and out, so just like simple melodies and repetitive. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason why the music doesn't become complex. We're going to get into that. It's not just jazz. It's really kind of, it's like jazz with a philosophy of hip hop. The grooves and like the sound world of it is often, has like a lot of a drum set that's very like foundational for hip hop playing, like using the rim and like kind of mellow drum beats that are still they're like gentle, but they're kind of punchy, and a lot of like just like a lot of kick drum, a lot of snare on the rim, and like a closed hi-hat. Not really over the top drumming, but what they do with the rhythms will be really fascinating. The other thing they use in this music a lot is this idea of found sounds. All right. Found sounds is anything that it doesn't really belong there. And that's one of the key components is he uses they use background elements that you might not hear in music usually. That I was really excited when I started like sort of understanding what they were doing. They're kind of like dragging in sounds of like an elevator door closing or the escalator or like street sounds. And at first, when you first hear it, you're not sure like what's going on, but what the effect that it has is it makes it feel like you're sort of listening to this music in the elevator or you're walking down the street and the music is like actually in your headphones sort of, you know? Because these found sounds, they're not, they don't change the music, they change the framework of the music so that you feel different when you hear these sounds like you are in the music rather than listening at the music. It's a really clever technique to sort of throw off the listener from their usual expectation. If I put on some sort of chill, relaxing Grover Washington from the 70s, I wouldn't really hear like street sounds, you know? So I'm listening into Grover, but because they put those sounds in there, and it kind of draws your imagination in. Let's listen to a little bit of that. I'm just gonna skip down here a little bit. Like these sounds don't make any sense on their own. This is a great example we're going to listen to a couple times by Plasma, and I need to kind of get through this commercial. Plasma is just like a sort of German DJ home producer guy, and so he submits his track, Marmot Stance, he submits it to Chillhop, and then he gets put on the record. And here's the interesting part about the business model that it's very different than the way we think of albums. They only release, like Chillhop only releases 1,000 copies of this album. And I wanted to find it, and I noticed that so went and they autograph all of them, and then that's it. And so they sell them for $30 if it's a double LP. But after that, it's gone. And that scarcity is really interesting because now to find it on vinyl, you have to pay $100 or $150 because there's only 1,000 of them out there. You can get it, you can buy the music at the beginning and be a part of it. But if you don't like buy in consistently, guess what? You can't find that album when you want it later. So it's very different than our sort of current idea of music entrepreneurship. You know, they're creating their own scarcity of their product, but they continuously release new products. But the products they have like a shelf life. There's only 1,000 copies. And so when it's gone, like you'll still be able to hear it, but it'll be hard for you to find it or buy it. So it's a great different approach to exclusivity in a sense that we don't usually think of in jazz. Like in jazz or in other styles of music, we we like print 1,000 copies of music, and then if somebody wants more, we'll order more and print more. But they don't do that. They just say it's over. And so, like, good luck. And that little bit of like creating their own market demand makes their followers more loyal, sort of. Let's check out this song. I think it's a good example of what we're sort of getting into. It's one of the best pieces of this genre to me. Like, we talked about this found sounds, like the sound of the elevator stuff and like the door opening. It's like, I don't know if it's a grocery store sound, but it just creates this certain difference that makes the music relaxing. The noisy, the busyness of it, like the randomness of the sounds they choose, it kind of elevates like the experience in a strange way. There's a lot in here that's really well done. You know, go back and check it out on your own. Just, you know, pull it up on YouTube. Marmot's Dance, pretty easy to remember. Put it in your car and listen to it a couple times and tell me you don't hear a ton of interesting stuff. It's hard to sort of convey that over Zoom a little bit, but it has a lot of little details I want to talk about that make it really well done. The first thing we talked about was like found sound, like the randomness of those noises, and like there's kind of like a rain sound in the background. It kind of draws you in. I think like people have done this before, like with, you know, sounds on the albums in the 70s, but it was never sort of like into the music. The difference being like, you know, Led Zeppelin or somebody might have some noises between tracks, or the Beatles, but then the music takes over. Here, what they do that's different is that the sounds of the world around them are becoming part of the actual music. So that little difference of philosophy, to me, makes it more relaxing. And like just this track alone has 75,000 hits. But if you go look on you know, Chillhop, like the players, some of their tracks are they're like playlists that people use to study and listen to music. They got 5, 10 million hits. So they're not necessarily making money on the front end, but when you've got 10 million hits on YouTube, you're making something, you know, and then a percentage of those people are then buying the music because, just like me, they heard it on YouTube, but they kind of want to own it. And then they go to buy it, and guess what? There's only 1,000 copies. So if it's gone, now they want it even more because it's gone. You know, that sort of feeling of shopping. You go shopping for something and you can't get it, and then that drives you to go deeper to find it somewhere else. Okay, we talk about found sounds. The next thing here is like new syncopation. The rhythms of Chillhop, they do a great job of pushing the envelope in terms of music production techniques. Like the drum beat is the kick and the snare drum relationship is often delayed, or the hi-hat might be lined up in a way that's not symmetrical with the beat, and so it throws you off. It's very much sort of a going back to Jay Dilla and even before him, like Tribe Called Quest, but especially Jay Dilla and his album Donuts. A lot of experience like from the drum set as a jazz drummer, but then chopping his music up and turning it into samples, and then editing his live drums as samples. Chillhop is very much like the whole school of Chillhop. It's very much following that that model where the beats don't they don't hit in the traditional way we're used to. They have this sort of sarcastic jumpiness to them. Let's listen to that one more time. Listen to the hi-hat and listen to how interesting it is. Like it's like, it doesn't sound like the hi-hat's going to make it to the beat, but it does. And that's what gives it that unique hip hop flavor. Listen to the also influenced heavily by Timbaland. If you're familiar with hip hop producer Timbaland and his idea, like he would often sing beats before he played them. You know, he would sing the beat and he'll record it into the microphone. And then from there, he will recreate it because it's more natural than trying to program it on your computer. But the hi-hat is really beautiful in how it's delayed, and it's like not quite right. It's that little bit of it just being off. And if you're a producer and you want to make music like this, it's only 4 chords. The bass waits really long before it hits. It hits just on like the last 30-second note before beat 2. So it's kind of technical, but instead of playing, it's more like it's just a little bit sarcastic. Like being able to wait and play like that is very hard as a musician. And it's fantastic when you have a bass player that can do it because it's uncommon talent as a player. It's not harmonically very complex tune. Check it out. G minor, E flat major, C minor, and then D major. That's it. It's only 4 chords, this whole tune. And I say, I always marvel at simplicity when I see it because, man, it always feels like if it's simple, then I can just do it and I'll be famous and I can sell a ton of Chillhop albums. You know, you discover simplicity and you hope that it gives you the magical power, but it's often more frustrating. You know, Mozart is simple, really simple, but that simplicity is so hard to get to, and like it's still like the masterwork of any musician is still elusive. Even though we can figure it out, it's really hard to say how you would do the next song. You know, even though you can discover somebody, discovering how you're going to do the next song without copying them is hard to figure out. It's a really difficult question. But this song just has these 4 chords: G minor, E flat major. Anybody can play this on piano. C minor, and then D major. And that's it. Check it out. I play it on piano with it. It's fun too. Like, like there's nothing complex about that. It's just somebody just kind of getting in the studio, turning on the microphone, and singing something that's fun, and like getting out of their creative block by having fun. The synthesizer is backing up the vocal stuff, but again, the vocal stuff gives it that little sort of authenticity that a real person created this stuff. And it's not meant to be serious. Like, it doesn't mean it's not well crafted. It just means that it's that to be a fun musician is just as important, if not more, than being a serious musician. A lot of musicians are good at being serious, but they're not good at being fun. You know, again, you like this. The vocal stuff here is very influenced by Timbaland, who was a drummer before he was a producer, and he probably played jazz in high school and everything else. And he's in touch with like the organic spirit that has to be inside of music for it to happen. Let's listen a little bit more here. Little jazz fusion in here, but again, the melody is just D, F, D. G, A, B flat, C, D. It's nothing but G minor. Right? When I say it's nothing, and that's what always impresses me, is that they're good at using a little bit of music, a little bit of notes, let's say, to create a lot of music. The bass plays the same stuff. Again, the basic concept of the song is just these 4 chords, a little melody comes and goes, and then you have this sort of magical world of stuff around this simple harmonic scheme. We talk about the found sounds, new syncopation, the way that the instruments are lining up. They kind of push the envelope. You wouldn't usually play like this. Here, the bass, the way it sits back in the pocket, the way the drums kind of push, and the way the hi-hat is kind of messy. Those relationships have been created by technology. The randomness of it, and now musicians are playing like this hip hop, this chill hop stuff live. That's also real interesting, is that jazz musicians are playing like this stuff that came from computers, and they're taking it to the next level for live performances, this sort of new syncopation. Things don't line up the same way necessarily. These like the relationships are blurry between like the elements of music here, like between the guitar part and the bass line and the drums. They don't have to play by the typical rules. The beats, because you're using computers, you can kind of push like the limits of like rhythmic displacement. So the rhythms are, you can have odd groups of notes that you wouldn't usually have when you're playing live, and it could still work. The other thing is that, this is an important part, is that it has a lot of space for the audience to listen and be on their own journey. And I think it's really important because it's appealing to a lot of people. So it's not jazz like overwhelming its audience with like human virtuosity, like, you know, watch me play the hell out of the saxophone. It's a different idea where you're creating a space for people to listen. But because you take the melody out of their way, because you're not playing a bunch of notes at them, they have time to think about themselves. You know, they have time to go on their own musical journey, and that's like one of the values of this music is, like, in a lot of ways, people want to be the melody in music today. When you're a performer, you kind of feel that, like, people want to participate as much as possible, and they like music where they can feel like they're the melody. So you take the melody out of your music sometimes and let them think. If I'm playing this chord, you know, it lets you think, right? Because nothing's happening. Like, you're naturally drawn to sort of go on this journey, I feel like. Because it's not very busy. Because I'm playing a chord without a melody above it, like, you become the melody in a strange sense, right? It causes you to think, but it doesn't tell you what to think about. That's one of the beauties of music here. Like this little space, it naturally makes you think about something, or it makes it feel like you're drifting, right? If I play a melody, then you're drawn to that melody. Right? If the melody sort of takes your attention, but what a lot of people seek in music today is like a feeling of space in their own life. I think part of it is that our life is so busy that this music appeals to people because it doesn't overload you with the melody. It lets you like think without having to listen to a melody like somebody else is more important than you in a sense. It also helps you escape. A lot of these tracks have this video like the raccoon, and he's in these like sort of magical places that's like very peaceful, and he's hanging out. We'll take a look at some of those. Like I said this before, where is the melody? It's sort of in a sense like the typical rules of music are dissolved. You're listening to music for an atmosphere where you're the character in this story rather than listening to somebody's story. Doesn't mean like it's just for me. It's not like, oh, Chillhop is the only thing in the world I listen to. I guess what's real interesting is that I do listen to it, even as much as I spent my life playing melodies. I love listening to the stuff where there isn't a sort of bombardment with it, because there's times in my day when I've had enough and I want to listen to something where I'm important to clear my head. And if I listen to John Coltrane, that stuff is so important that there's no room for me to like evacuate my thoughts, you know, and like unload things. And that's what this for. I don't listen to Chillhop all the time. When I do, it's like, man, it really helps you clear your head a little bit and think creatively about what you're going to do next. Unexpected cycles. The music kind of rotates. Like we talked about the rhythms here and how they are not the typical alignment. The drums can be like in different places, and you can have sounds that loop in strange circles rather than predictable circles or the way we're typically used to hearing things. And we kind of listen to that. The other thing besides all the music elements is this sort of magical world that the music attempts to build. I've got this little link here. Like this is one of the animations I'm kind of talking about. So it has all these, again, it has all these elements of things we've used before in jazz, like the psychedelic stuff of Miles in the 70s or jazz fusion. Like this could easily look like an album cover from the 70s from Weather Report or another band. But what they're doing here is taking the atmosphere that we had on album covers and they're taking it to another level, which is incredibly important business-wise as a musician. I think it's fantastic for us to think about, like, what do we add to our world that makes people want to listen to this stuff? Because if these guys are doing it and they're getting a ton of traction in the music industry from sort of an underground movement of like sort of bedroom producers and people that play jazz, but they also like creating stuff that's not just jazz. Like, what can we learn from this about what we should be doing as jazz musicians in the industry of creating environments, not just sounds, for people to listen to, not just music, but what else goes with it that will draw people in or make people feel like they're part of something. That's like what I think Chillhop does really successfully is their customers feel like they're part of this big culture, and it doesn't belong to any country. I think the basic company is based in Germany, but they hire different producers from around the world to contribute one or two songs. And then they release an album and it belongs to the world. It's not really, you know what I mean? It's not from a place. It's more of a virtual community. And it's the other thing that's great for us to think about as musicians is it's reaching young audiences. And as smooth jazz has kind of disappeared, I feel like this is really taking the place of that market share, really in touch with giving people like something that's jazz related and it's commercial music. But it doesn't feel like their parents' jazz. Like smooth jazz, played millions of smooth jazz gigs, but I think young people often feel like it's their parents' music, you know, or it's like they'll love it in concert, but they wouldn't necessarily buy it. Whereas this stuff, it doesn't appeal. It comes straight from youth culture, and that's what's exciting about it as a sort of addition of music. And this is kind of a neat mix of how this little video here, it's made by one of the producers, Xander, and here he's showing how the music is sampled. It comes from instruments, and then it's sampled, and he's recorded it onto his sampler as like drum pads, and then he's recreating it. So like before we talked about it's borrowing from jazz, but then chopping it up and putting it on these drum pads. It's neat to think of this sort of musicianship differently. So like all these drum pads here on the screen, they're all different real sounds that he recorded, but then he's gonna trigger them electronically. So it's like, is this live music or is this virtual music? It's kind of both. So it's this sort of gray space. It's not like like the greatest example of like musicianship, but he's probably, I guarantee you, he can play the traditional drum set, and he thinks like a regular drummer. But this is an extension of his musicianship from the drum set. Now he's chopped himself up and he's put it on drum pads, and he's got these other sounds here. It's like me and like most people that are musicians, they're not just jazz players. They are also electronically interested, and they're also into other styles of music. You have to be versatile, and that kind of versatility is very common in like the average musician today. Isn't just a jazz player or a classical player. They're often very interested in like the electronic stuff and trying to mix it into their show. And I had this kind of question here, like what happened to smooth jazz? Like, where did it go? I think it's becoming this. It's like where smooth jazz kind of dealt with mixing R&B and funk into jazz. Now Chillhop is mixing hip hop into jazz. The overall sort of big picture is that they create a culture. It's like you feel like you're part of something. They have limited number of albums. They sell T-shirts. They have this videos with the characters, the animations that kind of draw in younger viewers. And it feels like you're creating like a quality of life for people. The music resonates with young people that don't traditionally find their way over to jazz, but they want something to listen to that's based on hip hop, but like based on youth culture, but still aware of like good, quality melodies once in a while and good chord progressions. I wanted to just kind of tie up, like I'll show you like one of my links. It's just an example. I was interested in this 20 years ago, and this is more of like the acid jazz style that came before Chillhop, and it uses the same elements. It still uses like these found sounds. I used like some DJ came in and he scratched on the track, and I recorded some radio noises. And it uses like a simplified version of jazz where the drum beat is very repetitive and sort of like a hip hop loop world. The bass line is very repetitive. It doesn't continuously evolve like jazz does. And the interesting thing is when you pull back as a jazz musician and you create this commercial music, it draws in a bigger audience than, and look, I'm the director of this, I teach this jazz program. I'm the mad person for jazz. But I can tell you, when you pull back from just thinking about yourself as a virtuoso and you limit your music a little bit, it has a bigger audience because everybody doesn't understand like being bombarded with a ton of notes all the time. That is like really difficult for the average person. But if you give them a real simple drum loop like I did here, if you give them a simple bass line, you give them some weird sounds, make them feel like they're in the environment, it resonates with a bigger crowd and they feel it. Because if you have music that's repetitive, it creates this feeling of trance. Like you feel like you're going somewhere and you feel transported. And that's one of the Chillhop things. And that's one of the things I did here with this little example from my album. It kind of describes like, this was like a life in Chicago, and it's kind of busy. And then the horns are still like the usual suspects, like jazz saxophone, jazz trumpet, but the bass is more limited. The drums are more repetitive, but they still groove pretty well. But you're pulling back on the most expansive ideas in order to play something that is something like that helps people get out of the busyness of their life. One saxophone, harmony part, radio noises. Just D minor to G, 2 chords. A little guitar. It's very repetitive because it gives you a chance to feel and sort of think on your own, Like, the interesting thing about music is like the deeper stuff has to become simple because your listener can't go on a journey if they're thinking too hard. So the trick as a musician is, how do you find something that's simple and still good? That's the beauty of Mozart and Chillhop. Like, how do you be repetitive without boring? And then finally some jazz, sort of, So it's like old, sort of like old elements of Blue Note music, you know, the old Blue Note albums, and the way, but in the way that like they've resampled Blue Note in the last 20 years, sort of taking that stuff, those Blue Note horns or the Blue Note grooves of Horace Silver, and updating it by in a sense simplifying it and thinking like a hip hop producer, where you chop things up instead of stretch things out. So I think that's about it. That's everything I had to say about Chillhop. I appreciate you guys being here. It's good to see everybody. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to take any. I don't know about that, but I'm just going to stop the screen share.
Very cool, Pete. I really enjoyed that. I don't see any. Well, could you take off the screen share for just a second?
Yeah.
I want to see the chat window if there were any questions. I did not. Okay, so here's one question actually. Do you see that there at the bottom?
Yeah, Camila, what audio do you prefer to use? That's a good question. She's talking about which digital audio workstation do you like using. They're all good. You know, it doesn't matter. Just be good at all of them, and they're all very similar. I would say I like using Apple's Logic program the most because it has a fantastic group of tools. If you have an Apple computer, it is absolutely worth the cost. I think it's $200. It's incredible value of tool set. Like if you have Apple Logic, you don't need anything else. Also, I like using Native Instruments. Their suite of instruments, a contact player is really good. Some people are using Studio One now, but I would say, you know, I really recommend you check out GarageBand and then Apple Logic more than the other programs, because they're very user friendly, and then you spend less time editing and more time being creative. And that's really important, because if you're editing, if it's taking you a long time to edit, you're spending less time on thinking creatively.
Yeah, no, so Pete, always great hanging with you. I thought this was a really unique session for today. I'm glad we could include it into the...
Good to like think differently. You know, like if these guys are selling 5 million Chillhop albums and it's right next to jazz, we need to think about it and be aware of it. Like how are they, look at how they're being successful. They sell t-shirts and stuffed raccoons and all this stuff. Like it's crazy, you know, because they create this sort of big culture.
Yeah, it's
not just going to see them. It's not just going to see music on stage. It's this whole sort of buy-in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool. So hopefully we'll do some related sessions in the future to this. We can be creative with it, because we know that there's a lot of people out there that do have interest and are experimenting with this now. So I appreciate you bringing it to our attention and including it in the sessions. We'll get this video up in the studio and also on the podcast. And send in your feedback for other sessions or topics, info@clearwaterjazz.com. Go to the website, check out education and outreach section, the studio, the podcast, the stop time series, and let us know what you think. We'll look forward to seeing you in future sessions. All of the upcoming sessions are listed at clearwaterjazz.com's education and outreach page, where you can click on the Zoom link to join the live sessions or watch them later. And many of the guest musicians and educators oftentimes will have a Spotify link of recommended listening or session materials that you can click on, and it's really great. So Pete, until we meet again, thanks for being part of this.
Thank you. Thanks everybody.
All right, take care everyone. Stay safe, be well, keep playing, and we'll see you soon.
All right, thanks.